VTalk, a podcast by vTech Solution.
Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome back to the vTech Solution webinar series. My name is Mike Pereira. I am your host. I am the Chief Strategy Officer here at vTech Solution. Those of you that are not familiar with vTech, we are a federal systems integrator headquartered here in Washington, D.C., focused on cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, network infrastructure, and cloud solutions. Today's topic is going to be the digital cloud transformation. We are honored to have three amazing guests today. The first is Mr. Adam Summers. He is the Cloud Value and Transformation Federal Lead at Google Cloud. Thank you, Adam, for being here.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure.
We also have Mr. Manoj Gupta. He is the Head of Partner Engineering and Client Executive Architect at Google Cloud. Mr. Gupta, thank you for being here, sir.
It's my honor and privilege. Thank you.
And we have Mr. Reet Alwick. He is our Senior Staff Solutions Engineer and Federal Civilian Lead at VMware.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for being here. Again, honored to have you guys here in this discussion. Okay, so we're going to follow the process as usual for the audience. We're going to open this up with a couple poll questions, two quick poll questions that are around the cloud themselves. The first question is here. It is, what is the main benefit of cloud transformation for businesses? I'll give the audience about 20 seconds here to make that answer, and then we'll go into the next one. Great. Second question is, what is the biggest challenge faced today by businesses in achieving successful digital transformation? Again, about 20 seconds here to answer that question as well, and then we'll review these at the end of the conversation. And folks, as always, especially with this panel, we know you're going to have some questions. We're gonna use Q&A at the end of this. That way these gents have the time to share their ideas and thoughts. But then we will open it up at the end for those questions and answers. Okay, we can move forward. Okay, so first question, and this is going to go to Adam. Adam, what are the main drivers, in your opinion, behind the shift towards the digital cloud transformation in the public sector?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. So cloud adoption is definitely trending up in the public sector. When you look back over the last 6 or 7 years, I would say the federal cloud spending is tracking around a 14% CAGR, or a compounded annual growth rate, which is really pretty significant. And by now, we all know the pandemic, we know the story. Pandemic accelerated the move to the cloud, both at the state and national levels, and even in the commercial space, because it offered speed, it offered flexibility at these sort of urgent moments when demand was really kicking up for services and people were moving to work from home shifts. But that's really old news at this point, right? Believe it or not, it seems like yesterday. So what's driving it today? Well, cost reduction and the ability to do things quickly never go out of style. So those are definitely two factors. What we're really seeing today is this shift towards transformation, which is what you're asking about. And there, governments are definitely looking to cloud technology to deliver on the mission, both for the constituents, but also for the government worker. Because as we know, retention and recruitment is just way down. It's difficult to compete, especially for those kinds of skills. So what do new capabilities and transformation look like? Just a few examples. Analytic capabilities, faster development cycles, digitization of paper or data meshes to pull in information and surface insights a lot quicker. Automation, just to name a few. Yeah. And I think what you're seeing is, these legacy solutions really can't deliver on it or can't deliver on it in total. So there's this move towards more modern architecture so you can engage with microservices and things like that. The one thing I'll add to all of this is, for sure, the adoption and usage patterns, depending on the agency you're talking about, vary. So as you're thinking about it, whether you're, whichever side of the coin you're on, delivering or procuring, you have to think about your own, or think about those technical, organizational, and regulatory issues that are very specific to the organization.
Yeah, no, well said. And retention is something that is talked about, I think, more than ever. Especially in the private and public sectors. Okay, thank you so much, Adam. Reed, this next question is for you. Question number 2 here. How does the digital cloud transformation enable organizations to be more agile and flexible in responding to the ever changes in the business environment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting question. So, kind of some of the stuff that Adam kind of alluded to, right? So traditionally, agencies have been a little more challenged when trying to make changes, whether it be operationally or functionally or whatever, right? So some of those challenges have always come back to, how do we speed up deployments and how do we improve on some of the legacy processes, right? So those have been some of the challenges that traditionally agencies have run into. Me, myself, being a former federal employee, I kind of dealt with some of this stuff firsthand, a lot of red tape and challenges with that. So there's a couple of things that we kind of look at, right? So I've seen, at least from VMware's perspective, we've seen kind of 5 major use cases for digitally transforming and looking at cloud as a kind of future path forward, right? So the biggest conversations I've been a part of over the last couple of years have been DR. How do we have it take our on-premise workloads and extend them into a DR? Existing data centers, how do we extend some of those capabilities to whether it be another data center or into cloud, right? And in other cases has been let's take our data center and we're going to close it. We're going to go all in on the cloud, right? We had plenty of conversations around that, scaling up for virtual desktops and being able to provide some of those end user capabilities for folks who are working at home. And then, and Adam definitely alluded to this, for application modernization, right? Containerization, Kubernetes, and using some of those capabilities and improving the architecture of applications. So kind of how Adam alluded to, right? COVID kind of threw a wrench into everything, right? Transformation was kind of, hard to do prior to COVID. And then when COVID came around, everybody's kind of sent home. Everybody had to scale up quickly and adapt to how things were done, which was very new for public sector and government, where traditionally we had review boards and doing X, Y, and Z to make those changes and move applications to cloud or what have you, and we had to pretty much do that in a matter of days or weeks to basically adapt to what was quote unquote the new normal. And I guess if you take a look at some of the technology benefits that came out of COVID, was we learned how to do these things quicker and not go through all these processes and this red tape to get things done, which traditionally could have taken years as opposed to days or weeks to get stood up, right? So it definitely gave us a different perspective, and hopefully some of those capabilities are starting to be available now, as opposed to again falling back on those legacy processes that we had in the past.
No, and that's a great answer, Reed. And I think one of the things you said there that really resonated with a lot of us that are in the federal space is the delay of the modernization, right? Or some of those migration efforts. Let me just ask you kind of a quick follow-up.
Sure.
And those in the audience that are in the federal procurement process. We love the federal procurement process. This is not a knock on the process at all, but we all know it's timely, right? So if you had to estimate in terms of months or even if it goes out years, you think, in your opinion, what is that delay because of COVID that has put us behind in terms of time frame? What does that look like to you?
I mean, it's definitely sped things up, right? I mean, just it kind of proved that things could be done quicker, right? As opposed to, going through 10 different reviews and 10 different teams and getting kind of buy-in from everybody. Just the fact that we know that things can scale up quickly. It just kind of given us that blueprint of, hey, these things can be done at a much faster pace. Let's do it. Why are we waiting to go through all these different processes to get there, as opposed to again, when COVID, again, that was an extenuating circumstance, but, again, it proved some of the capabilities that can be done fairly quickly.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Absolutely.
Third question here. This is for you, sir, Manoj. What are the key considerations or best practices for migrations for a public sector agency today?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair question because, on the heels of what Adam and Reed were just talking about, right? Why digitize and what's the importance there? So that's one aspect of that storyline. The other aspect is how do we do it without any impact to the business? What I mean by that is anytime you kind of adopt a best practice strategy for migrating to the cloud, it has to be built upon some key considerations and key tenets, right? So for example, anytime you're doing that, it has to be driven by three major drivers. One is the impact to the business, right? You want to mitigate any risk to the business. So even though digitization is a great journey and a lot of companies have already made that, but we have to put some thought behind that. So the whole risk mitigation factor is very important. The second thing is cost optimizations, right? You don't want to take on a project for the heck of doing a project in the cloud, right? If it's not delivering a specific ROI and doesn't provide the value to the business, we need to kind of pause and kind of really reassess what's the best approach to that. The third is you also need to assess how this cloud digitization is going to help you, kind of drive towards more cloud models, like our cloud, the main things that cloud's known for. How do you improve flexibility? How do you improve scalability? So those are some high level ideas, but so how do you plan a journey and how do you plan some journey to the cloud? Number one, I would say is assess your business drivers, as I said, right? And your current environment. So and as an architect, and I have done this, and a lot of you guys may have also done it, is like you always start with a back of the napkin assessment. And oftentimes you take a top-down approach. The top-down approach is what are the key business drivers? And does your current environment lend itself to digitization of some sort in the cloud? Because that also means, especially in the federal agencies, we have certain compliance and regulatory factors that come into play.
Yes.
There's some interdependencies or interconnections between these workloads. So you have to assess everything collectively before you do that. Second thing in your cloud journey or digitization would be, what's the right multi-cloud strategy that you should be choosing? And remember, I use the word multi-cloud because there are benefits to doing, and based upon what Adam was saying, I think the industry has recognized that you don't want a vendor lock-in. So a multi-cloud strategy based upon the value that these cloud providers provide should be adopted and chosen, right? Based upon compliance, performance, reliability, all those things, and support. So number two factor in your journey is around multi-cloud strategy. Then number three, I would say, is always do things in a phased approach by showing quick wins and ROI as you go along. Do not wait for the big bang approach at the very end, because that oftentimes delays the whole thing. Start with something smaller scale, start with something non-mission critical workloads, move to the cloud, and kind of build upon that, right? So this way you kind of mitigate any factors, any issues that may come up from a network latency and there's so many factors when you're coming out of your own data center and moving to the cloud. So you want to do that. Number four, I would say, is how do you prioritize workloads? What I mean by that is you just don't want to move everything in the cloud in one big approach, right? Prioritize workloads, see where you can deliver the best ROI earlier on, right? Once the CFO is happy, everybody's happy, believe me, right? And same thing goes for your internal stakeholders like CIO and CTO. So prioritize workloads, deliver it in the cloud, and show some quick wins so people can buy off on that. Number five factor is testing and validation. Very critical, right? Do not take it like test in different scenarios, right? Brownouts, blackouts periods, like test for identity management, test for any redundancies and DRs that you may be building. So do that. Number six is the whole thing, once you have deployed, is how do you monitor for performance? How do you optimize for performance? how do you ensure that the workloads that have been digitized and moved to the cloud are truly delivering better than what you expected, right?
Right.
And that oftentimes happens by continuous monitoring and continuous kind of some sort of a operation setup, right? DevSecOps, some of those things. And the last thing is, I would say, is around compliance, because anytime you're making this digital journey, you have to be cognizant of, are you ensuring all the regulatory pressures, right? FedRAMP, HIPAA, CJIS, ITAR, IL4, IL5s, right? Depending on which industry you are in or what kind of workload you're moving. So ensuring that all those fundamentals are there is going to be paramount. So again, and here's a beautiful thing. A lot of public sector agencies, whether you look at, federal agencies in the civilian, national security, DoD, or in the SLED market, higher ed market, have done this, right? It's a proven path, but these are just a few ideas that I want to share with the with the audience here. Is like, don't rush to it, plan it, and plan the baby steps. So hopefully that's helpful, Mike. Yep, back to you.
Oh no, that was an amazing answer. Thank you so much. That great insight there. And just one question to add on to that, sir. And I think you bring up a great point in terms of the multi-cloud, right? I think we're seeing more of that happening in the private sector world because of lost dollars. And they're quickly, embracing that approach. When do you see, based on your expertise, sir, when do you see that sense of urgency happening, on our side of the fence in the federal sector?
Are you referring to like why do multi-cloud, or when it makes sense? Is that what you're, yeah.
Yes, when they're going to start more embracing that and heading in that direction.
Yeah, so I think that's a very fair ask. And, because I did touch on that. And oftentimes, having worked with a lot of federal agencies, I've been in the public sector for over a decade now, right?
Yeah.
The biggest factor that multi-cloud gives you is avoidance of any vendor lock-in, right? We all know that, and when you try to write or customize or really adopt a certain vendor's methodologies or processes, it's very hard to move on, right? That's why an adoption of open source platform as much as possible, right? Whether it's some sort of a Postgres, MySQL for databases, same thing goes for, I know, we touched on containerization, microservices, right? You want to kind of start with a fundamental, like, how do you develop applications? How do you integrate with databases? The more you can adopt and avoid vendor lock-in, it's going to be good, because that also gives you flexibility, right? And what I mean by that is, let's say with no vendor lock-in, if you were to ever change the platform or re-platform it or refactor it, it becomes so much easier, right? When you do that. Second thing is, when you have a multi-cloud approach, oftentimes you can choose a primary and secondary, right? You can say, but I don't want to put my eggs in one basket. And I've got several anecdotal examples of agencies that I work with where they may choose one cloud service provider as a primary, but because they don't want to put all the eggs in one basket, they want to have a COOP arrangement, continuous operation, right? Where they may decide to use a DR at a different second cloud provider, right? So having that sort of a multi-cloud DR strategy also really bodes well. And this goes back to my previous example of how do you move towards the cloud, right? That factorization should be done at the get-go, right? Do not put all your primary, secondary, DR, everything in one. See what if it makes sense economically and also technically and also from a performance point of view. Wonderful. Number three, I would say from a multi-cloud approach perspective is this whole notion of getting better security and compliance, right? So we have all heard about GovCloud, right? GovCloud is a good paradigm, but it comes with a lot of limitations, because in GovCloud, oftentimes you see cloud service providers offering cloud services, which starts deviating from the commercial cloud. So you want to kind of keep that into factor in terms of, hey, as you're choosing multi-cloud, where do I get the best bang for the buck? Where you do not have to think about these little nuances, right?
Right.
And multi-cloud, by the way, believe me, as a client, as a customer, you also get the bargaining power. What I mean by that is you get better cost optimization and cost savings, because you can choose And I know Adam and I've done several projects. Oftentimes we'll always say, let's build a business case before you do the project. Make sure there is an ROI and a very rapid ROI. So cost optimization is such a factor where you can say, how would these multi-cloud providers weigh in for my workloads, right? Where can I find the best balance from a cost performance perspective? And the last thing I would say is this whole notion of in your digitization journey that Pre touched upon is like, how do we become more innovative and become more agile, right? Every cloud provider is known to deliver certain key superior services, right? Like at Google, we are known for AI and data analytics and everything else, right? Mm-hmm. We are so far ahead. So if you have specific needs for AI, this kind of workloads, you want to choose a cloud service provider which are innovative in that area versus if you're just looking for infrastructure and everything else. So,
well said.
So I think multi-cloud is a great approach. I think it should be seriously looked at, Mike, I would say. But I think there are certain other factors and other value that it brings from your point of view as well. So hopefully that helps.
No, that was wonderful. Yes, please.
Can I add a couple of things there? So yeah. I agree everything with those you mentioned, right? It's very imperative to kind of keep those things in mind. The one thing that we as VMware kind of see is that traditionally we've kind of worked with all of the infrastructure folks, right? We've been just recently been having some of these cloud conversations with our integrations with Google, Azure, and AWS, right? So at least some of the folks where we kind of talk to, some of the challenges we kind of run to is that when we're talking to some of these infrastructure folks, they really have no context of what the application is running, right? So having a real good idea of what I'll just speak from a VM perspective. Let's say if you have virtual machine 1 sitting in a data center in somewhere in DC or wherever, if the virtualization team or the infrastructure folks have no understanding of how that virtual machine interacts with other applications or other databases or web services or whatever, traditionally you're going to have those challenges of, hey, let's just take this virtual machine and move it into a cloud without having done any real analysis, bringing in the application users, the developers, or whoever, and really getting full context of what the integration points are to really have a successful migration. And that kind of goes directly in line with what Manoj mentioned, right? A lot of the folks we're having conversations with aren't just using one cloud, right? They're saying usually at the minimum 2, if not 3, sometimes even 4, right? So it's pretty interesting that nobody's going kind of all in. They're using each one of their clouds for some of the benefits that specific cloud provider offers, right? And Manoj kind of alluded to that as well.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great question. Great answers there. Okay, next one. And this is going to be kind of two-sided. Manoj, we're going to start with you, and then Reed, I'd love to get your feedback. And of course, Adam, you can always chime in and with your thoughts here. Okay, so can you discuss the advantages of a and you kind of just talked about it a little bit, but just a little more specific, some of the advantages on that multi-cloud strategy over the single cloud solution. I know you talked a little bit about having the DR and some of those other aspects, but any other additions that you'd like to add to that?
I've got one.
My biggest, when I talk to a lot of companies are coming to us nowadays and like trying to assess. They started the journey in one particular cloud service provider, right? And rightfully so, because everybody has launched capabilities at a different time period, right? So one thing that we are seeing is as the market is maturing in the cloud, right? The vendor space is maturing, right? Everybody has got some very unique capabilities. So as a customer, as a public sector agency, you need to kind of really, I think it behooves for everybody to do the due diligence and just not just accept the de facto, right? Challenge the de facto, understand and show the value to your stakeholders and to your leaders, to your business providers, and say why this makes sense from all aspects. Naturally, everything starts from a business case, a business driver, and ROI, and then you also have to tie in very, like technical merits to that, right? A technical architecture, technical superiority, whether it's price performance, right? So I think oftentimes in a multi-cloud, those are the things that allow you to do that. If you're a single cloud vendor or you're tied to a single cloud provider, what happens is you do not get that flexibility of moving elsewhere down the road, right? So those factors become very critical, right? And so you want to be as flexible, right? Because you don't know where things may change or how industry may, because this industry is rapidly evolving, right?
Yes.
You want to be very flexible. So next year, if something new comes out, you can easily adopt that. And that's why the open source example that I use is paramount. So any way you can adopt open source and not have a vendor lock-in is a good practice, right? So yeah. And I don't know if Adam, I know you and I have done several projects. I'll turn it over to Adam and see if you want to add to that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that actually was a really great explanation. The only thing I was going to add to that is to build on that a little bit is when you move to the cloud, it's sort of a different way of doing business. The skill sets you need, how you organize, right? It's a shift. So if you've already done it once, you've already sort of paid the toll once. It isn't incrementally that much more work to add on a second or third cloud provider. And when you do, you sort of get this almost like this arbitrage opportunity where you could move to the best solution for you or the best price solution for you, whatever it is you're looking for,
Right.
with a lot less pain than it was to go to the cloud initially. So I think you're going to see more and more of that.
That's wonderful. Reed, love to get your thoughts here, please.
Yeah, and the thing is, I echo what Manoj and Adam kind of alluded to, right? That those are most of the conversations that we as VMware have are kind of along the same lines, right? There is no goal to just choose one vendor, right? We want the ability to let your application and users dictate where that application goes, right? And then based on that, folks do not, again, to you guys' point, there hasn't been anybody who just says, hey, we're going 100% all in on X, Y, and Z cloud vendor, right? So kind of having that flexibility and doing that kind of initial assessment to ensure that all your needs are being met, whether it be performance, usability, so on and so forth. That's been the biggest thing. And I've had conversations as recent as last week where I had a specific agency that I'm working with that's kind of looking to do the same thing. They pretty much said, hey, we want to do X, Y, and Z in Azure, X, Y, and Z in AWS, and X, Y, and Z in Google. And they also said, we also need to have some level of on-premise environments as well, right? So that's kind of that hybrid multi-cloud type of environment. And those are a lot of the conversations that we're starting to see and have been having for at least the last couple of years at this point.
Yep. Wonderful. No, that's wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for those answers. That was great. What a great conversation on that particular question. Okay. Next question, Reed, we're going to start with you. And then we'll get answers from the other gents here. How does cloud data security and privacy impact cloud adoption and transformation in the public sector? I know this is very important.
Yeah, and security is going to be always at the top of the list, right? I mean, usability and security usually go hand in hand, and those are things that end users and agencies are always going to be very cognizant of, right? So security is going to be, I would say, probably top 5, if not top 3, of priorities of a CIO, right? Making sure that data, regardless of where it sits, whether it's on-premise in one of the cloud providers, is top of mind, right? So, and Manoj alluded to this in one of the previous questions where, there's so many different components out there, right? So FedRAMP is going to be one, especially for federal agencies, right? FedRAMP is going to be one, HIPAA, all those different certifications are out there. Now, when you talk about those certifications, those are definitely great starting points, right? So agencies, in most cases, as far as what I've seen, is that's a starting point, and then they have their other additional layers of security that need to be, checkboxes that they need to meet their security baseline. Now, the challenges that I've kind of seen, and I'm sure some of my peers have seen, is that how do you get past when you start going into this multi-cloud world is, tools tend to get a bit, scattered in that sense, right? And that kind of leads to configuration drift and some challenges there. So tools configuration, misconfigurations, those can potentially lead to security breaches. And of course, nobody on this call or anybody watching wants to be on the front of the Washington Post or whatever article, right? As being a part of that security breach or what have you, right? So, one of the ways that we can kind of combat that is using tools that can be spanned across, multiple cloud providers and on-premise, right? So if you have one security baseline that can go across all of those different vendors, that makes life so much easier in the sense of, having that potential for drift. And then automation. I think automation is huge as a part of this, right? Because there's always some level of human element when it comes to, application development, lifecycle, things like that. So, there's always that kind of, let's build out automation so that this process that we're doing 100 times is done by some level of automation, as opposed to somebody doing it manually 100 times and the potential for a mistake.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up some great points there as well. And often we hear about that pico or micro segmentation at the application layer in that type of environment. So thank you very much. Manoj, I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, no, I think Reed covered a lot of that. So I would take a pass on that and see if Adam may have something more to share, because
the obvious thing I'll just add to that is it's such a paramount issue. That's one of the key things that slows things down or has been keeping some of the laggards from joining. It's exactly that. So.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you, Reed, for that as well. Okay, question number 6. Adam, this one's going to start with you, sir. What are the benefits of cloud transformations for organizations, including, I know we've touched on, you guys have all touched on it a little bit here, but cost savings, increased agility, that improved customer experience that everybody's pushing for, all the way from the PMA to across the board?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And we have been touching on it. So let's just review sort of the headline drivers, right? Cost reduction, that never goes out of style, right? Ability to deliver services efficiently and effectively. And then we mentioned kind of at the end of what I was saying previously, to better deliver on the mission, new capabilities. But you have to even go, I think, a little bit more deeper than that. I think leaders really see cloud as a very important investment opportunity that has to be thought about in a strategic sense and thought about carefully. To make the case for cloud, you're allocating, scarce resources, and they have to look at it holistically. It is very, very easy to sort of over-index just on cost, right? And that may not get you the right answer. So when you're looking at it, you have to look at, first of all, the costs of doing business holistically. And that's we call it the total cost of ownership, right? It includes a lot of things, should include a lot of things like energy, environmentals, contractors, leases, the staff, a whole host of things that sometimes get overlooked versus just the infrastructure itself, right? And when you move to the cloud, a lot of that stuff just goes away or becomes smaller. So in addition, 2 very important things kind of come to the surface. First, this is kind of important, is a much better matching of true IT demand with what you provision. Often companies will just over provision because they're not really sure what they need. So there's all of this idle capacity that you're paying for, and it's expensive, right? So that can go away with the scalability of the cloud. Second, cost is one thing, but there's another side to that equation, right? Beyond cost cutting, there are actual strategic business benefits to moving to the cloud. So this is kind of a mechanical example, but almost everybody has siloed data issues, right? So if you consolidate this kind of information into a joint data lake, you're going to get not only new insights, but you're going to get to them faster and get the output faster. And what that does is create bandwidth. So, and you can measure that in terms of an FTE, a full-time equivalent, and that's time essentially. And you can reallocate that time so those folks can focus on other parts of the mission, other systems that are really in dire need. And it's a huge business benefit that sometimes gets missed. And you can get much more specific. You can talk about supply chain issues, or you can talk about, just how you're dealing with your customer directly, engaging the customer. But the point is, there's a strategic element to it that has to be included. So we help businesses. Google has a very large and thriving sort of ROI business case practice, which I'm a part of. And when we do that, we really look at things holistically. We look at the business as usual, and we look at that as compared to the new cost paradigm, because it is new when you go to the cloud, as well as sort of the strategic elements that are created that create real value that you can measure. So it is, it's not an easy answer. It's not just about comparing one infrastructure to another. It's a more complex answer, and the results are usually very positive in favor of the shift.
Wonderful.
And if I may just add one point to that, Mike, is another thing that I've seen is the better collaboration, right? What I've like, I know cloud and from a move to the cloud and also the cost saving that we discussed, right? I think cloud allows you these tools which were not prevalent before, because oftentimes with on-premise, there were limited choices, right? Now you have a flexibility of choices to really, like, for example, at Google, we share Drive, we are working on multi-version documents. That was not possible at all, right? You have to kind of attach documents, send it to somebody, they'll get it, they'll look at it. And there was so much version mismatch, right? Now, with some of the products and productivity that's going on in cloud and the innovation that goes back to that, I think the collaboration and instant collaboration, where the 4 of us, 5 of us can be collaborating and sharing ideas, working on the same document is possible, which did not exist, right?
No.
So I think that's another huge productivity gains that cloud has enabled, right? Which we didn't, honestly, that's also 24/7 now. People expect these systems, and this goes back to why multi-cloud also. People are expecting anything that you're running in the cloud to be always available. So if somebody, like me, wakes up at the middle of the night, want to do some work, hey, you know what? I can get on the system, I can work, and I can collaborate with my team that's overseas. So I think that aspect is huge from that perspective as well. I see that, right? The productivity is so high. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's a great point. Ree, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Adam did a pretty good job of kind of going over most of the points I wanted to hit. The one thing I wanted to add would be the last part of that question is customer experience. The way I kind of look at it is, my mind is always kind of trained to kind of focus on, if I'm using, whether it be an app on a phone, a website, or some type of system, what's the user experience going to look like, right? I think that's kind of one of the forefront things where, if something, works and does its thing and it doesn't have a good user experience, 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to go back to it, right? I'm going to find another alternative. Like, let's say, for example, I'm an iPhone user. If there's some other app that I can download that accomplishes the same thing, but it does it more streamlined way, that's going to be something I focus on. And yeah, I think that's going to be the same case for whether it be some type of application that a federal agency is using or whatever system, right? So that's one thing that I always kind of focus on, is that, focusing on not just the application, but how it's used and how it's, applied, so to speak. The interface is applied.
Yeah, and I think that we measure so much in terms of implementation costs and what is the business cases, and but it's that ease of use that also needs to be measured. Otherwise, you don't get that buy-in from the end users, and so oftentimes things get shelved, or they you have major delays in productivity, just like Mr. Gupta was talking about. So no, I think that's a great point. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So one thing I also, Mike, I wanted to add on that that just came to mind is, there's some agencies that one of the agencies that I worked with had a lot of cyclical workloads and seasonal workloads that were dependent on, depending on what time of the year. Cloud in general, I think, helps with those types of workloads as well, right? Scaling up on premise, traditionally requires some type of hardware procurement or what have you, and potentially could be challenging depending on if you have excess capacity laying around. Cloud type of solutions do provide that benefit to have the ability to scale up and scale it down as necessary.
Yes. No. Good point. Good point. Well, let me open it up to the audience, and right before I do that, gentlemen, I just want to thank you guys for a wonderful conversation. Your answers bring incredible value to the marketplace, and we do appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much. Let me open it up. Are there any Q&As that the audience has at the moment they'd like to ask these experts while we have them here? I don't see anything at the moment. If there are any secondary Q&A questions, though, we'll make sure that we reach out to these gentlemen. We'll get them answered for you. We'll get them back to you. And Adam Manuz Reed, I just again wanted to thank you for your time today. And again, your expertise. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
very
having
much.
us.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.